Distilled shenanigans, distilled shenanigans. Here we come a-brambling with distilled shenanigans. Here we come a-brambling on. Welcome to December, everyone. Today we're going to be brambling on about bourbon, rye, whiskey. Oh my. I want to say, this week I'm super excited. I'm going to be heading to Biloxi, Mississippi with a couple girlfriends to run my 44th marathon in my 44th state. I can't believe we're getting to the end. It's getting wild. I never thought I'd make it this far, and I don't think most of the people in my life thought I would either, because everybody that we know gets injured with the running. I have 23 months to go before I am finished with this 50 marathon and 50 state goal. I cannot wait. It is I don't even know. It's been such a goal of mine, and I think because everybody were telling me that, oh, you can't do that, that's kind of lofty, are you sure you want to do something that difficult? It made me want to do it even more, because I am the most stubborn person in the world, and if you tell me that I cannot do something, or if you think I'm not good enough to do something, I'm probably going to try it. For better or for worse, I'm probably going to try it. So, pretty excited. We're going to be flying into New Orleans, and that is the home of the Sazerac drink. So, our last episode of 2023 will focus on some shenanigans happening down in New Orleans, and then we're going to talk about the history of the Sazerac. So, but today we are doing a blackberry bourbon bramble. So, anyway. Yum. Okay, so on with it. What is whiskey? What is rye? What is bourbon? My oh my. Whiskey is like the patriarch of the family. It's characterized by various grains and an aging process in wooden casks that contribute to the distinct flavors in the final product. That's the long and the short of whiskey. So when you look at the family tree of whiskey, Scotch, Irish whiskey, Japanese whiskey, it's all just whiskey. All right. So then when you go to that grocery store, and you're going to look at that bottle, and you're going to see something labeled rye whiskey. Well, that is another type of whiskey that has specific production requirements. And those requirements are, it has to be made with 51% of the grain rye. So that's pretty much it. Just if it's over 51%, it's going to be labeled rye whiskey, and there you have it. Rye whiskeys, which are some of my personal favorites, they are kind of spicy. They have a little grassy flavor, not to be confused with earthy. I don't know. We'll probably cut that. But I like this. I like the spicy. I can usually pick that out if we're doing a blind taste. I can't tell you what rye it is, but I can usually pick out a wheated rye, a wheated bourbon, a rye whiskey, or a regular bourbon or a corn mash. And so that brings us to the history and story of bourbon. So this is another type of whiskey that has very specific production requirements. And to be quite honest, the idea of bourbon is a purely American invention. There was no real act of Congress that declared bourbon an American spirit. Instead, it was a resolution passed in 1964 that recognized the origin of the spirit making. In that resolution, bourbon was designated as having achieved recognition and acceptance as a distinct product of the United States. The resolution also stated that importation of a product that called itself bourbon was going to be prohibited, making bourbon a pure American product. So it's kind of interesting. What are these standards of production requirements that bourbon has? Well, in 1909, the Pure Food and Drug Act was amended to include criteria specific for bourbon. Prior to this change by President Taft, mash bills for bourbon were all over the place. While the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897, which we talked about last episode, already set some sort of standards for whiskey, this new amendment in 1909 established the 51% corn criteria for bourbon. So what else does bourbon have to meet to call itself bourbon? Well, it has to be made in the USA. Not a shock there. It has to be, that mash bill has to contain at least 51% corn. It has to be aged in new charred oak barrels. And it has to be distilled at 160 proof or less. And that's it. Those 4 criteria. So this is going to be the controversial part of this episode. Despite popular belief, bourbon does not have to be made in Kentucky. It can be made in any state in the nation. Now, if a producer wants to call it Kentucky bourbon, they are obligated to distill it and age it at least 1 year in Kentucky. And it cannot be mixed with any other whiskey or bourbon from any other state. So it's that pure Kentucky bourbon is legitimately Kentucky bourbon. Now, I can tell you that while you can have bourbon from the other states, we typically do not see anything really labeled bourbon outside of Texas, Indiana, and Tennessee. And when you do some research on that, like Kentucky has a specific climate. So as those barrels are aging in the rickhouse, that climate really affects the flavors that are in the bourbon. We keep on brambling. I tried making this thing on camera. Like, usually you can use a blackberry syrup for the blackberry bramble, and I just muddled them, and I couldn't get it to strain out the strainer. And then I'm on this white chair, and oh my goodness, it was a nightmare. Really, they're probably the funniest things ever, but I'm so embarrassed to show you because I really do know how to make a good cocktail, just not sitting on a white chair in front of a camera on a tiny little stool here. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's short and sweet episode related to bourbon, whiskey, and rye. I think it's so interesting how many different acts and resolutions and all sorts of history that bourbon and whiskey has in the United States. So I hope you're enjoying learning some of these, and remember, you only get one shot. Make it top shelf. Welcome to Libation Legends. Today we're going to be talking about the Whiskey Bramble. I hope you're ready for a short one. Today's information is going to be coming from moneyinc.com, and the article is The Origin Story of the Bramble by Lily Wordsmith. I wonder how many of these names are real and how many are pseudonyms, because there's some interesting names out there. I don't know if you've noticed that yet. Here we go. The Bramble cocktail sounds like a complicated beverage to mix, but the recipe is very straightforward to make. One look at the perfect example of a Bramble cocktail reveals why they call it the Bramble. Its blackberry garnish covers the name as example of brambles of berries with tempting fruit ripe for the picking. If your goal is to create the perfect bramble, it helps to know the origin of the drink, what to include, and how to mix it the right way. Choosing the best ingredients and combining them as directed will take you a long way towards achieving perfection. We researched the origins of the Bramble cocktail and learned about its creator and evolution through the years. Here's everything you need to know about the Bramble cocktail. The Bramble cocktail is the creation of a famous bartender named Dick Bradsell. He invented the clever cocktail in 1984. For those of you who are not familiar with Bradsell, he is a pioneer in the London cocktail crowd. He was working at Soho's Fred's Club at the time. The Bramble is a hybrid of the gin sour and the cobbler cocktails. He added the blackberry to remind him of his early days growing up on the Isle of Wight. The Bramble became so popular that it's considered a modern classic. Unlike many other cocktail origin stories, the Bramble is uncontested. It's widely accepted that Dick Bradsell created the drink. Bradsell shared the story of a French bartender who paid him a left-handed compliment. Difford's Guide reports that the bartender confined that the drink became popular and hit the mainstream big time among cocktail drinkers. He found it unbelievable that someone of Bradsell's status could have invented such a clever beverage. While it was an insulting remark, it confined that the Bramble cocktail had become a huge success throughout the world. And there you have it. We even have someone. What do you think of this one, Kitty? What do you think? Well, she didn't try and bury it, so I guess that's a win. Cheers, everyone.